the ushers to come forward this morning. Like our morning tithes and offering. Thanks so much as you continue to give. One quick announcement. As you've noticed, Lakeview Church is growing, and especially you see it here with the kids. So part of those growing pains, a good growing pain, is that we need more help with our kids' ministry stuff. I know sometimes that can be very intimidating because you're not sure what you're getting into, but I want you to know there's a variety of opportunities, jobs, positions available, and even if you try one out for a few weeks and you don't like it, you're not stuck for the rest of your life. So my question, hope, challenge to you this morning is, if you're not serving somewhere else, if there's a place that perhaps you haven't found your fit, maybe kids ministry could be for you. On page 32 of the journal, there are some forms to fill out, some opportunities, gives you a better idea of what's available. So check it out in the journal. I made a mistake, believe it or not, on this journal. On that page it says parent volunteering. That is not true. That slipped through the very last edit. Anyone can volunteer and be a part of it. So if you're interested, fill out the form, drop it at the info desk, or talk to Nancy or Darlene and help out if you can. So this morning we conclude our series in Colossians, Raising Questions. And we began the series by introducing a big term. The term was empire. What does empire mean? Empire is any system or any structure in place that creates big winners at the expense of big losers. An empire can show up in a variety of places, not just corrupt corporations, but in broken systems or in people like you and me. We buy into the empire every single time that we don't show love or grace or look after one another in those sessions where we just look after ourselves. So as we have tracked with this study, Paul's got the big terms, he personalizes it, brings it even close. There's things that you need to deal with because the empire just isn't out there with those people. It shows up in you and on your doorstep. And this morning as we conclude the series, he gets very personal with us, Paul. And he's going to call out the most intimate relationships that we have and make us aware, to raise questions and how empire can make its way into those relationships. So to you and I as Christians and the church, he says, subvert, undercut, undo evil in those sessions, in those places, in those relationships. And best of all, we can do that by raising the right questions. Why we do what we do, how we do it, who we do it with. So today we'll get to those very personal pieces. There's going to be a lot of teaching on the front end here, what Paul was talking about to his people, etc. And then the back end of the message, we're going to answer the question, well, so what? What does any of that have anything to do with me? And as always in this series, there's going to be time for Q&R at the end, so the number will be on the screen. If you have a question this morning that pertains to something that we have talked to, please text it in. And then maybe even at the end of the service, we're wondering if we should bring this feature back in future series. Maybe send us a quick note saying we liked it, we didn't like it, should we do Q&R, should we not? Even if it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down, that will help us understand where to go next, whether we continue it or put it out of its misery. Good? All right, here we go. Colossians, back end of 3 and into 4 says this. Wives, understand and support your husbands by submitting to them in ways that honor the master. Husbands, go all out in your love for your wives and don't take advantage of them. Children, do what your parents tell you. This delights the master to no end. Fathers or parents, don't come down too hard on your children or you'll crush their spirits. Slaves, do what you're told by your earthly masters and don't just do the minimum that will get you by. Do your best. Work from the heart for your real master, for God, confident that you'll get paid in full when you come into your inheritance. And keep in mind always that the ultimate master you're serving is Christ. The sullen servant who does shoddy work will be held responsible. Being a follower of Jesus doesn't cover up bad work. And masters, treat your slaves considerately. Be fair with them. Don't forget for a minute that you too serve a master God in heaven. Okay, so if you are new today, visiting, hanging out with us for the first time, this is a bit of an awkward passage, right? Slaves, kids, women, all lumped together nice and pretty here at the end of Colossians. A bit awkward. For those of us who have been tracking with this series, we can talk till we're blue in the face about this little church in Colossae, how they are being oppressed, they're fighting the power, they're living on the fringes of empire. But what does any of that mean if it's not good news, if it's not a new hope for those who are the most vulnerable, the women and the children? and slaves in this context and in many contexts in our own world? What's it worth to talk about these things if these people aren't being protected and looked after? Here's the thing. So this morning, what we are about to unpack together is actually a revolutionary text. Even though when we read it at first pass, it seems a little bit oppressive, and maybe in some places it even sounds dangerously close to hate speech. But we need to remember who Paul is and who he's talking to and what time he is explaining this. So understand the setting quickly like this: that the economic importance of women, children, and slaves was carefully guarded in Roman law. The bulk of rulings regarded the guardianship of women, and the various laws upholding the power fathers had over their sons was rooted in the practical necessity of safeguarding family wealth. Similarly, the legal code ensured that slaves, even if made free, continued to be legally under the power of their former masters. So in short, you could say that women and children and slaves were actually property. Living property. Now think about that and hold it in tensions and hear the tone of what Paul is explaining here right now. Who's he addressing in this passage? He's actually speaking to, in parts, the women and the children and the slaves, which is a little bit crazy for his setting, because what he's actually doing in this moment is actually he is raising them up and bringing them to eye level. He is saying, you know what? You are more than just what you can do. In a sense, he is validating them. They're more than the functions that they perform, and they are not just property, they're actually people. And then notice how he addresses the other parties in this passage. To the husbands, to the fathers, to the masters. These aren't three different people. This is the same person. Remember the context and how socially and economically everything went through the male. They were the people who were in charge. So now add another layer on top of that. There's the cultural setting, there's who Paul is actually talking to, and now he's talking to this group that's a church that's more than likely meeting in somebody's house. So now the household codes and the social codes and the economic expectations of the world are showing up in their home, and it's overlapping with this newfound faith. So the codes and the convictions, they are beginning to butt heads. There's a little bit of overlap. And now Paul is saying that the way you run your house, the way you operate it, the way you look after all of its members, it needs to adapt to this new hope that we have in Jesus. All the relationships, all the roles, all the rules need to evolve in a way that you have never seen before. So then, what we find here is the attempt to embed the Christian faith and its ethical values in the social structures that already exist. Which sounds great. But if you're like me, when I first read this passage this week, you know what popped into my head? If Paul really wanted to be revolutionary, if he really wanted to turn the world upside down, what he should have written was, hey, masters, free all your slaves this instant. Let them go free. How about that? That's what I was feeling. Maybe you've asked that question right now. Well, why wouldn't he say that? That would really do some damage, wouldn't it? But you've got to remember the context. That the slaves in Paul's day could be likened to how we use natural resources today. So think of any great empire. What is it built on the backs of? It's built on the backs of slaves. Expendable, cheap, free labor. You can get as much as you want whenever you want. So Paul is speaking in to that place. And imagine if he was here today and he called out, for example, natural resources as if they were a problem for the Christian. What he would say today, or I would say, would be, hey guys, so we just read this Bible passage. It just said that natural resources are wrong. So what that means right off the bat is that you can't drive your car home. Yeah, because a lot of the pieces that, it actually all comes from the earth, right? The metal, the plastics, everything else, that's a natural resource. You can't use it. Oh, and the fuel, the fossil fuel you put in there, you can't use that either because that's also a natural resource. So it's going to be a long walk home for you. And when you get home, just remember, you can't heat or cool your house because that's natural gas or electricity. Those are natural resources. You can't use those either. And sorry, not to make it awkward for you, but all of you are probably wearing clothes right now that you didn't make. Did you spin that cotton? Did you dye it? Did you sew it all together? It was probably likely made by someone who is still living property. So here's what we're going to do today, Lakeview Church. On your way out today, I would like everyone to disrobe. Just take all your clothes off. We'll leave them at the end of your aisles and have a good, nice, long, cold walk home to a house again that you cannot heat or cool. Awkward, right? There's some groans back there. Oh my gosh. I wouldn't want to walk out of here naked. It's kind of weird. It is weird. Imagine the ramifications. Imagine the ripple effect there. Imagine if your grocery store couldn't get the food that you needed anymore because fossil fuels is what brings it there. Or think of your job. How would you get there? Or maybe think, what does your job actually do? Does that infringe on some of these other things? This is the actual world that Paul is facing into when he talks about slavery. Now, is it a cop-out? I don't think so. So instead of dreaming about impossible freedoms, I think what Paul is offering here is actually some practical guidelines. What he's giving us are the beginning steps that head in the right direction in the middle of the mess that he finds himself in. So he says, men, to those of you who are in charge, in leadership, I'm not challenging your authority, but I want to modify it. I want you to adopt new patterns in how you see yourself and how you see those who are part of your household. So in short, what Paul is trying to do is that he is trying to equalize, he is trying to personalize, he is trying to Christianize all of the relationships and all the connections that are part of these households, beginning with the head of the house all the way down to its least member. And the neat thing is this, is that what Paul is saying here is something that really has never been said before. Because if we backtrack into what was being written and understood in that time, no one was saying what Paul was saying. In fact, what Paul was saying was diametrically opposed to the thinking of the day. Aristotle, the famous philosopher, writes this. He says, the issues of justice is not raised in regards to slaves. There be no injustice involved in the way one treats mere property. That's awkward for you and I. So compared then to what Paul is saying, compared to what Aristotle is saying, what Paul is saying is revolutionary. What he's actually saying is slaves are humans too. Women and children are humans too, valuable. With all the rights that come with being men, they got them as well. And to talk about justice and equality in relation to slaves would have been mind-blowing for his first readers. So then, when it comes to wives and to children and slaves, Paul is not, I repeat, he is not endorsing the systems that he finds himself in. Instead, what he's trying to do is to regulate it. And what he's offering and establishing are these first building blocks that will get these people out of this mess. He knows it, you know it, that he is swimming upstream in the culture and in the codes of his day. And he's detailing a very distinctive Christian approach. And if we were to name that approach today, I would call that approach damage control. Maybe let's think of it like this, that in 2011, clothing company H&M used computer-generated bodies with the heads of real models. It's not about ideas or to show off a perfect body. We're doing this to show off our garments, said a spokesperson for H&M. Sure you are. Sure you are. Because here's the thing. A study came out in that year that only 2% of women worldwide believed or would call themselves beautiful. Why? Because we, especially in the West, we have created this unrealistic expectation, unrealistic standards around beauty, and we have airbrushed and photoshopped these women, created them into this weird sort of plastic perfection. And then, not to make an excuse out of it, but little boys grow up in this world, and then we, as men, become accustomed to a distorted image of female beauty and sexuality. So now what? What do we do with that? Maybe this. That in 2007, cosmetic brand Dove launched the campaign for Real Beauty, which featured women being comfortable with their not-so-anorexic bodies. The campaign was praised but also criticized at the same time. The image of beauty which Dove presented was certainly different from the dominant image in the cosmetic industry. However, the women featured in the ad still do not represent the average woman either and are obviously selected for their beauty. Second, it still holds the assumption that beauty is the most important quality of women. And third, some pointed out that the hypocrisy of Dove's parent company, Unilever, whose other cosmetic brands sell Slim Fast diet products, skin whitening cream, and cellulite firming cream. So we read about what H&M did and it makes us feel gross. We look at what Dove did and we say, I guess that's a step in the right direction, but it's definitely not perfect. It's not far enough. By no means is it the ideal. But in Dove's defense, I think part of what they're doing is what Paul is doing. It's damage control for the way we think about women's bodies. So now let's think of Paul's approach in the exact same way. Here's what he's saying. He's not attempting to put women, kids, and slaves in their place, keeping them down. Instead, he's saying, under these circumstances, I know they're broken. I know they are a mess. In the middle of that, he's saying, be Christians. Be Christian in your approach, especially you men, especially those of you who are in charge. And again, the neat thing here, as Paul speaks to these household codes, he is saying things that nobody else in the literature of the time is saying. You can find reams and reams and reams of instructions for women, for kids, and for slaves, and how they should act and how they should behave. But you know what's missing? There is never, ever, ever any instruction for the men, for the masters, for the heads of the households. Why? Because they're in charge. Why? Because they don't have any accountability. Because basically, in that setting, they can do whatever they want. Some historians have even commented in saying, when there was a divorce at that time, men got the kids 100% of the time, no question about it. Or if your son was ticking you off, he was bothering you, he was doing something you didn't like, you could throw him in prison just for that. You could actually have him killed on a whim. Why? Because you're his dad and you're his property. And won't even start on slaves. So Paul is saying something that nobody else is ever saying. For us, it seems very basic, but it would have floored Paul's first readers. Now, a quick side note on that. Slaves or slave owners were required to look after slaves in a little way. So make sure they've got food and make sure they've got clothes, and that's where it ends. But take note of the carefully worded encouragement in this passage that we just read that the slave owners are given towards their slaves. And it says this: work from the heart for your real master, for God, confident that you'll get paid in full when you come into your inheritance. Let me tell you why this little line here, this one-liner, is music to the ears, is beautiful for the slaves who are hearing it. Because in that age, in that time, slaves were forbidden from owning property, and beyond that, there is no way that a slave would ever have any type of inheritance. Illegal, not going to happen. So Paul chooses his words carefully, and he says, hey, you're going to get your reward. Hey, you do have an inheritance. Why? Because Jesus loves you, that he has created you as equal, that he is in relationship with you. You're in the middle of a mess. I know you are, but don't worry. Don't worry. Jesus will look after you. Why? Because you're a person. You're more than just property. And everything that is coming to those who are masters over you or those who are free, guess what? It's coming to you as well. Why? Because Jesus said so. And this would have been revolutionary thinking at the time. So then, what does that mean for you and I? What would be revolutionary? What would be some of the questions that we need to raise as we think about all this? What's the big so what for you and me? Well, let's start where Paul started off and raise this important question. Are you and I looking after our spouses? Are we genuinely looking after our significant others? Paul uses the word submission when he talks about that relationship. And again, that word feels really, really dirty. But in the Christian understanding of what submission is, it's not. This same verb for submission is the same verb, same word used for when Christ submits to the will of the Father. It's the same verb used when Christians are called to submit to one another in love. When we talk about this spousal Christian submission, we're not talking about someone inferior coming below, someone who is superior than them. No. The Bible is actually talking about is serving one another, mutual submission, and actually working towards God's ends. And we got to be careful with Paul's language throughout the New Testament because it's gotten us into a lot of trouble. Sometimes I feel like I don't always agree with Paul, but sometimes I always feel like he gets a bad rap when it comes to the ladies. Especially when, and we don't have tons of time for this, but I'll just throw it in. Ephesians 5, where it says like the husband is the head of the wife. Man, have we used that one for the last 2,000 years to keep women down. But here's the thing. That Paul could have used one of 46 different Greek words to describe a relationship where there is a difference in power, where one's the boss and one's the employee, where one's in charge and one who follows. Paul doesn't use any of those words. When he talks about the man being the head of the wife, he's actually talking in literal terms. Man being first. Why? Because he's tracing it back to the origin story. Who was created first? Literally, it was the male, and then the female came second. Why is he pulling that story in? Because he wants to bring our minds back to that and remind us that, hey, you're responsible for one another. You guys are a team. You guys are doing this thing together. One is not above the other. You're equals. This is where Paul is pulling it. We have a responsibility to our spouses, to our significant others. There is a mutual submission that needs to occur where we are taking care of one another. We are called to equalize these relationships, to highly personalize them. Your wife or your husband or whoever, they're not just not a means to an end. They don't just perform a function for you so that you can get through life. It's not this economic power system that's in Rome. It's different. And even read, we don't have time this morning, that the back end of chapter 4 in Colossians, Paul is just saying hi to everyone he can possibly say hi to. Why? Because he's in relationship with them. And like we picked up in one of the services last week during the Q&R, you can only call someone out, you can only direct them when you are in relationship with them. So this is what he is calling. This is what he's trying to pull together here, Paul. And some of you might say, well, how? How do I really look after my spouse? Like, what do I have to do? Paul doesn't really give any real details here. Well, let me say something to you that I often say to my children. So my kids, video game nerds, they conquer worlds online. They create worlds. They are on top 10 lists for scores and points. They can do anything on video games and on the internet. But when I ask something like, hey, can you load the dishwasher? Oh my gosh, Dad, what is this thing? What is this creation? I don't know how to use it, Dad. I can't do it. So you know what I say to them and I say to you this morning? Figure it out. Figure it out. You're smart. You're not dumb. This is what Paul is saying too. He doesn't know the ins and outs of your most intimate relationships. Why? Because he's not you. You know where your relationship is good. You know where it's broken. You know what it needs. You know what you need to do. So figure it out. It's your responsibility. A question tied to that then is this. Will you and I, who identify as disciples of Jesus, will we disciple our kids in the way of Jesus? Parents, what would it mean for you and I to raise our kids to be subversive to the empire? To let our kids know that they are not subjects of the empire, but they are subjects of King Jesus. What would it mean for you and I to think really hard and discern and sort out and filter out the things that we allow to shape our kids? What would it mean for you and I to live in an alternative way where we showcase things to our kids, where we ritualize things like peace, patience, kindness, self-control, forgiveness, love, worship, wisdom? What if we intentionally set out to disciple our kids in the way of Jesus? This is going to cause you and I to have to set up some real good Christian household codes in your house. And again, you're not off the hook. Because here's the thing. I know you're smart people. And you will excel at work. You will excel at your leisure activities. You will do so many amazing, whatever you put your mind to, you can do it. But why is it that it seems like there's this invisible barrier when it comes to our kids? Where I don't know what to do. Oh, maybe it'll just happen. Nothing else in life works that way. So to the parents today, I say what I say to my kids again. Figure it out, man. Figure out what it will mean to disciple your kids in the way of Jesus. One last one, then we'll hit Q&R. What about the powerless? What would be revolutionary for us to say, think, and do? Because you and I, we keep different kinds of slaves, not like the slaves in Paul's world. You know how I keep people in slavery? When I don't forgive them, then they're at my mercy. I keep some prejudices hidden in here. That's a form of slavery. Sometimes I withhold rights from people. I see it in my friends who are in broken marriages, broken relationships. Man, they steal rights all the time, as much as they can get from their ex-spouses, because they control power that way. Or what when it comes to those who are inheritance-less, whether it be monetary, because there's many of those, but go beyond that. What about those who have no family? Like they got no people. What do we do with those who don't have that kind of inheritance? Think about it. When Paul is delivering the revolutionary words of Jesus regarding slaves, what he's actually asking those people to do is to limit their authority, limit their power. As the master, as the male, you can do whatever you want with your wife or your kids or your slaves. And with us, I can do whatever I want with those I don't have to forgive, with those I take away authority from or power from. I can just walk away from those who have no inheritance because it's not my problem. It's within my power. I don't have to do anything about it. But Paul calls you and I out and say, yeah, you could do that. It's within your power. It's within your control. But what if you limited that? What if you held back on that? What would be a revolutionary move on your part to those who are oppressed, fragile, broken, on the edges of empire? And that is a special word for those of you who find yourselves in a place this morning where everything is a mess and you are dealing with damage control. Because relationships get so messy, starting in your house and then spiraling outward. Is the problem going to be solved tomorrow? I don't know. Probably not. But what you're called to do in these moments, like Paul suggested, is put those first building blocks in place, ones that will lead you towards God's ends, lead you towards renewal and healing. Again, don't be discouraged if the world doesn't change tomorrow. It didn't for slaves for 2,000 years. Some would even say slavery still exists in our world. But we're getting somewhere. We're getting better. God's new hope is taking root. So again, in that instance, I say to you, figure it out. Figure it out. So with all that, let's hold all of what we said in tension, and let's move to our last few moments here of Q&R. I'm pretty sure that I'm batting 1,000 with these questions and responses this last month, so let's see if you got anything good. Tim, serve it up. What do we got? Slavery may not be the most pressing political issue in Saskatoon, but capitalism, socialism is. Who is this? I think I know who this might be. Would Christ align himself with capitalism or socialism? I hate you, Ben Schock. How should we live out our faith given that either position taken to extreme is problematic? What's good? Oh, man. You're right. It's not perfect. Capitalism's not going to save the world. Socialism's not going to save the world. Everything in between is not going to save the world. The only thing that's going to save the world is actually a person, and his name is Jesus. That's it. So sometimes, on some days, I feel like a capitalist. I'll take what I want from there. Most days, my heart maybe leans more socialist, and I want to pull those pieces in too. So sometimes I just play mix and match. The thing is that I don't submit myself fully to capitalism because it's not Jesus. I don't submit the other way either because it's not Jesus either. So I think we need to figure it out. I think we need to be smart and find our allegiance not in some sort of political party or some sort of philosophy. Our allegiance is to Jesus. And we'll let the rest fall out as it may. Cool? Next. Oh, thanks. Next. If Christians are committed to work towards the rule of all things, how can idealists like me, be content with the imperfection of that change we bring? Again, we got to think about it rationally here. Think of it from a Christ-like worldview. It is not your job to save the world. It's not your job to fix everything. It's not your job to call everyone out on all their problems. Your job, your success is found in being obedient to Jesus' end. Because Jesus, there's only one Messiah, someone told me once, and it's not you. He's putting it back together. We believe in his return where he's going to renew all things. In the meantime, in this in-between time, we do things that are in his spirit, in his way, even if they're not quite perfect or quite ideal. There was a little piece that we just didn't have time for in the message, so I'm going to throw it out here. They actually found this bronze slave collar from around the time when Paul was writing. And on that slave collar, it was inscribed, I'm the property of so-and-so, hold me close so I don't flee. So it's like this collar for a human being. It's almost like a dog collar. And you and I think about that and look at that and say, oh my gosh, that is horrific. How would you ever put that around someone's neck? But back it up, because that collar was actually a move in the right direction. Why? Because prior to that, slaves were actually being branded on their faces. Is the collar right? No. Are there going to be broken pieces and imperfections and busted up things? Yes. Will that continue to happen? Yes. But we are working towards something. And again, for us, our calling is to be obedient, to do what's right, and then we leave the details up to Jesus. Time for one more. What is the point of reading the Bible without a deep study of history? Seems futile for the lay audience. How can we better understand and apply hard passages when we don't have a Joe Manifo around? Oh, I know, right? We need some more Joe Manifos in this world, right? No. Thanks, Justin. Only enough room for one of me here. Well, here's the thing. I am not your Bible answer man. Nor am I your leader, nor am I your hero, nor am I your poster child. You are not following me. We are following Jesus together. I'm playing my part. This is a little thing I do. Lakeview is richly blessed that there's enough resources put aside where someone like me and other pastors and leaders on staff can dedicate serious time to this community. That is a gift. Let us never take that lightly. But here's the thing. This Christianity, your Christianity, is not my problem. Do the homework. Be a student of the scriptures. Be a disciple of Jesus. Here's why I think it's so funny, is that sometimes we just think that, you decide to be a Christian, then all of a sudden, out of the sky, all the knowledge and all the wisdom and all the power is all there and you're just perfect. In life, how does anything work like that? If I want to be a doctor, I study. If I want to learn how to fix cars, I study, I try it, I work it out. So I read like a madman. I'm thinking about these things. I'm trying to hang out with people that I don't agree with or understand because I want it to expand my love, understanding for the world that Jesus has put me in. So the onus on your discipleship is on you, not me. We do it together, yes. Support each other, yes. Do your homework. Figure it out. Because here's where I think we're challenged here in 2016, is even the way we've set this whole thing up here. Check it out. I bought this book once purely based on the title. The title was When Church Became Theater. And about 200-ish years ago or more, we really locked into this feel. where there's a man, obviously, a man standing at the front, and it's this auditorium that's going to carry his voice forward, and you're all going to sit there like good little people with your soft chairs and your cup holders and your popcorn and whatever else, and you're going to take in the show for an hour, and then you're going to go on your merry way. You can come back and turn the channel back to Lakeview Church at 11 o'clock on Sunday, or you can stay home. You don't have to keep watching. Does this work? Sometimes. But it breaks down tragically when you think, when we think that we're just Christians because we're just taking in the information. Church is not theater. This is an active, high-contact sport that Jesus calls us all into. So then, with all of that in mind, may we remember that as disciples of Jesus, what we hold on to is a new hope. And we need that hope because the world we live in is broken and messed up, and it feels like the fringes of empire are encroaching on every single part of our lives. So what that should lead us to do is raise the hard questions about our household codes and how we operate in our homes. What it should push us to is to be a people where we equalize our relationship with others, where we personalize and actually carry the weights and the burdens of others and not hold them at arm's length. But don't be discouraged, friends. I know we're in the mess. I know the empire has a foothold. But remember, we are in this season of damage control. Is it perfect? No. Is it ideal? No. But you and I can put those building blocks in place towards the renewal of all things. And that will call us into this place of submission, mutual submission, support, looking after, taking care of our spouses and significant others, our kids, and for those who are powerless. Why? Because we want others to be filled with this new hope of God that He is fixing and healing everything.